How you doing, everyone? And welcome to Direct Dreadnought Gundam and More on PS4. And this is the MS-05S Zaku 1 command type. And welcome back to Gundam Sunday on Direct Dreadnought Gundam and More on PS4. So I had some really good matches and what is quickly becoming one of my favorite mobile suits at the low point battle tiers of Mobile Suit Gundam Battle Operation 2, and that is the Zaku 1 Commander's type. The Zaku is the first technical combat-ready mobile suit because, of course, it is named the MS-05. There were 4 other prototype mobile suits that were developed from construction machines inside 3. But the MS-05 was the first mobile suit, the Zaku 1, to actually be developed and mass-produced as a combat-ready mobile suit, and was also the first mobile suit to engage in combat. And on top of that, was a mobile suit that carried out some of the most vicious atrocities of the one-year war between the Principality of Zeon of Side 3 and the Earth Federation. But this is the granddaddy of all mobile suits, including the Earth Federation mobile suits. It is the direct predecessor to the MS-06 Zaku 2, and of course the parts from the Zaku 1 and Zaku 2 led to the development of the Gundam and the Gundam mass production types, the GEM line for the Earth Federation. But this suit is so much more than the first, because as the war began to turn against the Principality of Zeon, the Zaku 1 also contributed to frontline service at the end of the one-year war in the months of November and December. And although many were destroyed because they were horribly antiquated by the time of the Battle of Abawaku, the final battle in the one-year war, there were several examples of this mobile suit being piloted by veteran pilots that did well in both the theaters of space and on Earth. So, there were construction machines, and with the help of the Minovsky particle, the Principality of Zeon, planning for their independence ahead of time, were trying to build a revolutionary new weapon, the mobile suit, and use construction machines to do so. The Earth Federation was already trying to make mobile suit-like, and in one case, a mobile suit prototype machines, but they had the philosophy of the Earth Federation Navy trying to match the enemy at long range with long-range firepower and artillery. Examples of this would be the gun tank and the prototype gun cannon. This, however, was a mobile suit that was trying to accelerate at all ranges, all theaters of combat in space and even on Earth, and was developed with a Zaku machine gun before the Zaku 2's machine gun, which fired tank shells at the same pace as you would an M16 or AK-47, and even had the first prototype of a Zaku bazooka. However, even at the start of the one-year war, Zeon considered this mobile suit obsolete and already had the Zaku 2 ready to go. Some improvements made over the Zaku 1 was that at the time they had not perfected the Minovsky compact fusion generator, and so had a higher output but had to move some of the internal cooling and electrical tubing outside in the Zaku 2 model. So the Zaku 1 was underpowered and had a lot of those core tubing and other necessary equipment on the outside of the armor. The Zaku 1 had it on the inside of the armor. And the Zaku 1 also was not as armored and didn't have as capable of a weapon set as the Zaku 2. Of course, there were other noticeable differences. It had a lower thrust, worse backpack, worse sensor suite, and it really just didn't have all the features of the Zaku 2. However, the Zaku 1 was relegated to construction and garrison duties where there were bases out of the way of the main front, and they were also used early on in the war on raids on the Granada base on Luna, and were also used by the Zeon Marines. Now you have the Zaku 2s being given to the aces and best pilots of the Space Assault Corps, so why not give the Zaku 1s to the Marines for invasions of colonies where they don't really need the extra thrust and where they're not expecting to fight any sort of mobile suit at all, just maybe some tanks, helicopters, or whatnot. And they excelled at this. However, this suit also has the infamy as being the mobile suit used by the Zeon Marines to gas a colony, which is weapons of mass destruction, to murder an entire population of a colony, and to also set the engines to thrust the colony into Earth and hopefully hit the Earth Federation headquarters in Jabra in South America. Unfortunately, during Operation British, this failed miserably and missed its target, and the colony instead hit Sydney, Australia, and did considerable amount of damage to Earth's atmosphere and all but annihilated the north coast of Australia. So very, very bad things. When people think of the bad things that the Zeon did in the war, you really have to look at the Zaku 1. But its tragedy, lineage, and battle history doesn't end there. During the good months of the war, when Zeon was winning on all fronts, the Zaku 1 did do some fighting against Earth Federation conventional forces, counterattacking their garrisons, and were also used to replace losses on Earth, which was kind of a good thing. Many commanders and aces actually preferred the Zaku 1 until better mobile suits like the Dom or the Gelgoog arrived, because the Zaku 1 was ready to go. There were plenty built and not being used, some in storage, some in garrison forces. There was readily available spare parts for them, and they could, with a little modification, use Zaku 2 type weaponry. In fact, this particular variant, the Zaku 1 Commander's type, all it really is a Zaku 1 with an added communications antenna and communications suite with some extra armor. And of course, this extra armor would bog down the Zaku 1, making it much slower than its raid version model, the original Zaku 1. But with that extra armor and extra command capability, the Zaku 1 could use things like bazookas, Rakuten bazookas, giant bazookas, Magellan attack guns, anti-shipping rifles, and really hold its own at long range and be a very, very good support unit. And of course, later on in the war and after the events of the 1 Year War, all the way up to 0096 in the events of Gundam Unicorn, you still see the Zeon remnants using Zaku 1s as support mobile suits. And there was one example of a long-range beam sniper Zaku 1 with an extra Minovsky particle fusion generator backpack. So 2 fusion generators in one mobile suit. And man, this one mobile suit did terrible, terrible damage in Australia during the attack of the Zeon remnants. So with the right pilot or the right ace, you can see that this mobile suit was very dangerous. And while other mobile suits were being piloted by rookies like the Zaku 2s, even some Doms, and of course if they got shot down or damaged, their mobile suit wouldn't be available on the front lines. They'd be hard to repair, especially in the waning months of the war when Zeon had very, very difficult supply chain challenges. The Zaku 1 was ready to go, easily repaired. Even if it got destroyed, a pilot could just hop in another, because there were just plenty of these doing manual labor or garrison duty, and you could just take it away from a security guard or take it away from a Zeon dock worker and use this thing very well. In the Midnight Fenrir Corps, who saw a lot of action in North America and in Africa and wound up surviving the war, these were elite troops from Casilia Zabi. One of their main veteran pilots loved using the Zaku 1 with a stolen Federation shield and a giant bazooka and a Guff heat sword. So you can see that it's very, very, because there's no real limitations on the design, because there's no real limitations on the kind of weapons it could use, a good pilot could load this thing up with extreme amounts of firepower and defense and just use strategy and cunning to their advantage and take on less experienced pilots in very average mass-produced gym mobile suits and actually fare very well. However, soon the Earth front fell, and these ground and commander and normal Zaku variants had no place in terrestrial ambushes on Earth or using such strategies. So the Zaku 1s down on Earth were really just guerrilla units, and they were being used in a guerrilla war against the Earth Federation and would eventually be the Zeon remnants. However, as the war turned against the Zeon in space, especially after the Battle of Solomon, the losses of the Zaku 2s and the Doms were so horrific at the Battle of Solomon that they had to press the Zaku 1 back into service. So even though Zeon was trying to make as many Doms as they could, as the Rick Dom specifically, as their frontline unit, the reality was that veteran pilots and aces would use the Rick Dom or the Rick Dom 2, and that newer pilots would use the Zaku 2, or pilots that prefer that machine. And of course, the Gelgoogs weren't ready for combat yet and weren't ready until the very last battle of the war. And unfortunately, by then, most of the experienced pilots were either dead or incapacitated or not available to field such large numbers of Gelgoogs. So the Zaku 1 saw a lot of service, especially at the final battle of Abaoku, where the Side 3 Home Guard, which were a garrison force that were pressed into frontline duty, mainly had the Zaku 1, and they fought against the Honor Guard of Zaku 2s. And of course, many veteran pilots who either used to the Zaku 1 controls or their main mobile suits were shot down and wanted to get right back into the action to make a difference, as this was the final climactic battle of the war, hopped into these mobile suits so that they could make a difference, and grabbed whatever bazooka or weapon they could and grabbed a shield and went right back out there. On Earth and in space, the Zaku 1 would often have Panzerfaust or grenades, and if you used it correctly, it could be a very good mobile suit. Unfortunately, the Home Guard were all but massacred. Many rookies that were forced to use this mobile suit were massacred because it was so hopelessly outclassed by even the worst Federation mobile suits. And by now, the mobile suits of the Federation had become quite advanced, and arguably more advanced than anything Zeon had at the moment. So for many veterans, the Zaku 1 was used with a bazooka, maybe a shield, and was a raiding type of mobile suit. For the Home Guard, the Zaku 1 was often equipped with Panzerfaust machine guns and was kitted to be more of a general purpose mobile suit, where it really didn't effectively find any use. It wasn't as effective as other mobile suits and was easily outclassed. But there were several commanders and aces that used the Zaku 1 in the Commander's variant, which, as I mentioned before, used advanced communications with the telltale Commander's antenna on the top of the mobile suit head, which was actually not just for show, but would facilitate easy communication with the rest of the team and could handle more data and more radio transmissions. And of course, with the extra armor and the extra weight of the extra weapons they were carrying, even though it was much slower, was much more resilient than the original Zaku 1, and in some cases just as resilient as a Zaku 2. The other thing that should be noted, what originally was supposed to be a design upgrade in the Zaku 2, putting those tubings and the electrical and coolant tubings on the outside of the mobile suit, actually turned out bad. At the beginning of the war, these tubes were thought not to be endangered. They couldn't be penetrated by small arms or cannons used by jeeps or aircraft, and the Federation tanks weren't accurate enough to specifically hit these tubes, as they were usually trying to aim for the center mass of the mobile suit, which is of course the most armored part of the Zaku 2. But it was found with the Zaku 2, right off the bat, the first battle the Zaku 2 had with the mighty Gundam prototype, the Gundam just tore these tubes off in hand-to-hand combat, and the Zeon forces were not expecting the Federation to have mobile suits. They weren't expecting it to be so aggressive in hand-to-hand combat. So when the Gundam came around, this gear on the outside of the Zaku 2 actually turned out to be a hindrance and make the mobile suit vulnerable in close combat. Where the Zaku 1, once it got a better reactor in there, or even if it didn't have the better reactor, once it had extra armor and all these critical components were still on the inside and they didn't have to make any room for anti-nuclear radiation armor, which the Zaku 2C early production type had to. Without these restraints, it was actually quite a survivable mobile suit as long as it didn't get hit with a giant bazooka or any beam weaponry. So if you were firing machine guns or light bazookas, grenades, and when I'm talking machine guns, of course I mean the Jim machine gun, which is 90 to 100 millimeters, so keep that in mind. That this suit with the extra armor and the commander's type was actually quite effective, and a lot of times the commander type in Mobile Suit Gundam 8th MS team, you saw a commander's type with just a Zaku machine gun, but in the Midnight Fenrir Corps for Zeonic Front and in other games and other Gundam media, you see that the Zaku 1 could use Magellan attack guns, which were very, very accurate, high caliber weaponry that could puncture all but the best armor at very, very long ranges. It could also use large bazookas to annihilate or stun a target and finish them off with the Zaku 2 Heat Hawk. And keep in mind that the Zaku 1 could use the Zaku 2 Heat Hawk very effectively. So it turned out to be a pretty darn good mobile suit indeed. In game terms, I think this mobile suit's quite awesome for a low point support. I think it's much better than the heavy arm Zaku. It has quite an extensive arsenal of long-range weaponry, but even if you use the humble Zaku machine gun, if you kit out a lot of range fire control system modules and also use that 30% bonus and pick on the plethora of general type mobile suits that are flying around in most matches, you can do quite well. I have done quite well in ranked matches. One of these matches I'm showing you now is ranked and one is unranked, but I think they're both really good and show you that even though this mobile suit is slow and can't dodge, that it can still be used effectively with good tactics and good reflexes. And it also has that Panzerfaust to get you out of sticky situations against raids. Well, there's so much more to the Zaku 1, but that is pretty much an overview of a mobile suit that is infamous because of the atrocities it committed at the beginning of the war, but also beloved by many Zeon fans because it was not designed for war and did a lot of non-frontline duties, but then at the end of the war accounted for itself very well on the front lines of a Baoa coup. And of course this mobile suit even survived many, many years amongst the remnant forces of Zeon on Earth, with examples like the giant bazooka Zaku 1, the commander type Zaku 1, and the beam sniper type Zaku 1, and that's all the way to 0096. So, quite an impressive, almost 20-year history. Well, that's it for me for now, and I'll see you soon in Sin Li Bay.